They're horizontal. Oop, this meeting's been okay. So yeah, they have these horizontal wide pupils that are perfect for laterally scanning along the ground, which is where all your natural predators are going to be. Deer can also see better than us at dawn and dusk and night, which is when they're most active. So they're not colorblind as many people think. Their vision is what is called dichromatic. So that means they can see deep into the color spectrum of two main colors, so blues and yellows, which you can see in the image there. Whereas we are trichromatic, so we can see multiple colors. We can see colors in more detail that deer cannot, such as the blaze orange that we wear when we're hunting. However, there's a lot of this blue lighting at dawn and dusk, which is perfect for the deer, their vision. So that's when they can see a lot better than we can. They can pick out details. And for night, they have this reflective layer behind their eyes called the tapetum lucidum. Not to get too medical termy on you, but that intake, this reflective mirror basically intakes errant light from moon and stars, and it will reflect it back through the pupil, and this gives deer a form of night vision, and also the reason their eyes light up if you shine a spotlight out at night. Deer can also pick up movement extremely well, so their eyes receive and process images about 4 times faster than our eyes. So as they're moving through the brush and dodging branches as they're running from a hunter or a predator, they can almost see it's kind of slow motion, which allows them to move through the brush a lot quicker. And 3, and probably the most important, is their smell. We do not know an exact comparison of their smell to ours, but we know that they have millions of more smell receptors than we do, and even somewhat more than dogs. So some have suggested they can smell about 800 to 1,000 times better than we can. So moral of the story, if you're hunting or just trying to get close to deer, do not wear blue jeans, be still, and stay downwind. Now, because of their commonality and physical attributes, the white-tailed deer has been a cultural icon in America for hundreds and thousands of years. So from Native American subsistence, the European fur trade, where buckskins were so valuable they were used as currency, which is actually where the term buck comes from when you're talking about money. And to the modern recreational values and aesthetic values. So this is the many reasons to manage sustainable populations of whitetails, as they are our most popular and economically important game species in the U.S. And deer hunters provide the vast majority of funds towards these wildlife conservation efforts through hunting license sales. There's a small percentage of the tax on firearms and ammunition that go back to these state wildlife agencies that are utilized for wildlife, their management on public lands. So that's why I always suggest, if you're interested in supporting wildlife conservation, buy a hunting license, even if you're not a hunter. That's the most direct way to contribute to the cause. Now, some of this money gets directed to universities to complete research that answers important management questions, such as some of the work that I did while I was at the UGA Deer Lab. So that's what I kind of want to talk about, is the North Georgia Deer Project. So I worked on this project for several years. It was a project funded by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and we wanted to investigate factors of white-tailed deer population decline in the mountains of Georgia. So many of you may be unaware that this is even the case there, especially if you live outside the region, likely around overabundant deer populations. You see deer all the time. And you may think these national forests, they have all the wilderness they could want in North Georgia. How are their populations in decline? But unfortunately, it's not as simple as having the space. So the Southern Appalachian region It's always had lower deer densities relative to kind of surrounding areas, the Piedmont, so on. It has poor, shallow, rocky soils. It just doesn't provide the high nutrition that really promotes these productive deer herds. However, populations were historically stable and slightly growing in North Georgia, which the area I'm focusing on is where that red square is. That until recently. So we collected deer harvest data from 8 wildlife management areas in the Chattahoochee National Forest. And they basically suggested that there's a deer population decline over the past few decades, which initiated our investigation. So just to break down this graph that we got, so on these WMAs, total hunter harvest of bucks has declined by 82%. So that's this line here going down over time. All the while, the number of days available to hunt male deer has gone up during this time. So it seems kind of counteractive of what you would expect. Now, we have lost deer hunters during this time at about 68%. But we're also seeing that the percentage of successfully harvesting a buck has also declined. So this can be related to deer density. Now, as a result of this, some of you may have seen, if you hunt in this area, both DNR and the Forest Service have enacted increasingly restrictive antlerless harvest regulations or doe harvest to combat this perceived population decline. So the goal being to basically increase the number of reproductive individuals on the landscape. So harvesting less does mean more doe are out there. They can reproduce more. So my goal was to look into possible causes of this decline and to what degree is this decline occurring. Now, one thing to look at is population health. So interestingly, the weights of harvested deer, yearling bucks specifically, and their antler growth is improving over time. This could be an indicator that the overall herd condition is good. It could be because there's less deer now, so there's more resources to go around. So the deer that are left, they've got all the groceries left to themselves. But the main thing that this suggests is that nutrition is not really a cause of this decline. Now, at the same time as this decline, North Georgia has gone through some changes. There are more predators now as American black bear, bobcat populations have been increasing in the region. Coyotes arrived to this part of Georgia in the 1980s. All three are known to be important fawn predators, with coyotes particularly concerning in the southeast as of recent times, known to contribute high mortality on some sites. So we have this suspicion that high predation rates of fawns could be contributing to this decline. You know, if you don't have enough young making it to adults, you have a problem. The other change is that on these forests, the forest structure is maturing. So about 90% of forest stands are now greater than 60 years old, which means that's a less percentage that's in this young forest, these early stage, early successional habitat being limited. So that early successional being these open areas with the tall grasses and forbs that contain a lot of forage, and they're typically used for fawning cover. So there's not much of that in North Georgia, especially on Chattahoochee National Forest. There's also been this history of fire suppression throughout the 1900s, a recent lack of sustainable timber management due to different regulatory processes, backlash from forest advocacy groups that have basically led to this forest being stagnant, closed canopy, and restricting growth. Some of the hardwood stands on your properties may even look like this. So what does this mean? When the tree canopy is so dense, it blocks sunlight from reaching the forest floor. This restricts that plant growth on the ground, these deer groceries. It reduces the cover that they have to hide from predators. So now you have high predators, limited cover. So it sounds like a bad time for fawns, and can lead to decreased fawn survival, which affects your population. So these mountains, they have very limited food availability in the winter. So deer are often highly reliant on acorns during the fall, and this helps them build fat to make it through the winter. The problem is, as many of you know, that acorn varies year by year. So I know you talked about having a good acorn year versus a bad acorn year. So this will influence the body condition of does going into the next year, and impact their reproduction. So now add that into the equations of predators, poor habitat, and that makes these deer populations even more vulnerable. So just to zoom in, we worked on Blue Ridge and Coopers Creek WMAs, as well as some of the private land in between. And I listed here the estimated deer densities through time. So you can see that it has gradually been growing since deer were initially restocked back in this time period. And the most recent estimate is the lowest it's been since the first deer came back to this area. So with that in mind, you can imagine catching deer where there aren't many deer can be very challenging. We had to try a bit of everything, obviously with the safety of the deer and ourselves as a priority. So we used drop nets, rocket nets. So I was actually sitting on a landowner's porch while I was videoing that, and dart projectors. So using these techniques, we were able to capture 59 does. We chemically immobilized the deer for workup. We took all the precautions. You can see here moisturizing their eyes. We monitor their vitals. We keep the deer sternal, so they're able to digest food properly and have that full lung expansion. We then attach GPS collars and implant them with vaginal implant transmitters, so otherwise known as VITs. So these devices are pretty cool. So once they're inserted, they fall out of the vaginal canal when the doe gives birth. So that change of temperature from being inside the doe to outside makes the transmitter send us a signal that says a birth occurred, and we can track that signal to the birth site and capture that newborn fawn. So using this technique, we were able to capture 71 fawns over those 3 years. All of these fawns were born between the end of May to mid-July, so that's a pretty wide fawning window, typical of the South. And when you backtrack that means the rut was occurring, which is peak reproduction, breeding time, during the first week of December in that area. So if you happen to be a hunter in that region, that's probably when you want to target. We attached expandable collars that we could use to track their survival and release the fawns back where they were originally caught. So this collar is very lightweight. It expands as the fawn grows, and it has also been tested in multiple studies to not impede their survival in any way. So you can see one of the fawns here. And we monitored those fawns for 12 weeks old, where that collar would give a signal if a mortality occurred. So then we could go in and investigate. Now here's just a quick video of collared newborn fawn being released. You can see it doesn't impede any movement of the head, any body movement, and this fawn just crawled back and found a good hiding spot and laid back down. So on this next slide, I'm going to show an example of a fawn mortality and kind of how we decide what killed that fawn, basically. So the picture could be a little graphic, but it is nature. I did cover it up some to help out. So this is an example of a mortality that we found, an unfortunate victim of a bobcat. So I covered most of it, so you didn't have to see all of that. But you can see that the kill strike was at the throat. So, that's very indicative of a feline, a cat. The carcass was also found with leaves pushed over it. So it was cached for later, which is also a bobcat trait. So the bobcat fed on it, decided to cover up, and was going to return to finish the job later. We also collected DNA swabs. You can swab these bite marks, and whatever saliva from a predator remains, you can send that to the lab and confirm what it was. And it did come back as a bobcat. Now, just out of interest, I went ahead and recovered this fawn and put a game camera on it to see what came back. And we actually did catch the bobcat coming back to the crime of the scene, or scene of the crime. And that's just to give you an idea of all the evidence that we use to determine, what's killing these fawns. I think he's actually got a deer leg in his mouth there. So I was getting him a little treat afterwards. So just the results of this. So out of our 71 total fawns, we only had 9 that we knew survived to that 12 weeks. That's not a big number. 4 had collars that prematurely fell off, so they may have got caught on a fence or just torn off. 3 collars were malfunctioned. They went offline. We couldn't track them anymore. 10 of the fawns died of natural mortalities. So that could include just emaciation, general failure to thrive, abandonment by the mother. We actually had 1 that had a deformity, cardiac fibrosis. We sent these to a lab to have a necropsy done, and that's what did that one in. So of the other mortalities, were 45 deaths were due to predation. So using evidence of what I just described. So of these 55 known mortalities, so including predation and natural mortality, 82% of those mortalities were due to predation. This was mostly due to coyotes, secondarily black bears, and lastly bobcats. So we estimated totally that only 16% of fawns on these WMAs in Chattahoochee National Forest made it to be 12 weeks old each year. So you see their survival is 100% at birth, and it just drops off rapidly during these first few weeks. Once they make it past like that 4-week-old time period, they can typically survive. These first few weeks are when they're very immobile. They're easy to catch at this time. They're very reliant on their mother for nutrition. This is when if they're going to catch a disease, it's usually early on. So just to put that in context, with other fawn survival rates that studies have found, you can see that our rate's among the lowest recorded. And just to clarify, that these numbers are specific locations and sites. They do not represent entire states. So when we look at all these captured deer, so we had our 16% fawn survival. Our yearling doe survival was 95%. So these are the 1-year-olds. These are the teenagers. So that's high fawn survival, or high survival for them. Adult survival was 84%, which is still moderately high. We could also look at how many fawns were being born per age group there. So yearlings, they averaged only 1 fawn each. And adults, some had singles, some had twins, so it was a little higher, 1.4 fawns per doe there. So these birth rates are, they're low, but they're moderately low, but they're expected for the Southern Appalachians for just these habitat conditions. Now we can put these values in a graph and see kind of what rate this population is declining. So what we find is the population is indeed in decline at about 4% per year. However, we wanted to see if we were able to boost this fawn survival. So maybe through some management action to a moderate level, could population growth occur? and we found that it could. So this is if fawn survival was at about 26% versus that 16% it actually is. So there is some hope, but we're going to have to get our hands dirty to make it happen. So that's where it comes into, so what can be done about it? So the first step was Georgia DNR and Forest Service, that they've restricted all antlerless and doe harvest on public lands in this region recently. And I believe their antlerless days were also limited on private lands as well, not completely restricted, but reduced. And again, with the idea of just needing more reproductive individuals on the landscape. Although we haven't seen much recovery from this action yet, so we're probably going to have to do some other stuff. But you know, this is a struggling population. So this is an example of how regulating hunter harvest is often the first move, and also a look at how these regulations are set. So there's often science behind how DNR acts. Hopefully, we do live in the South, so sometimes there's some politics involved in these regulations as well. So we know additional management should focus on improving this fawn survival to recover this population. And this is where people often jump to a predator control conclusion. So too many predators, let's get rid of some and there's going to be more fawns, right? So while there has been some evidence of this working, if it's highly targeted, continual, especially with coyote, the long-term effectiveness of this option would be in question. Coyotes can repopulate areas very quickly, and operations may not be very cost effective because you're going to have to do this year over year, and you may not even see the results you want to see. Increasing hunter harvest of black bears, it has been effective for elk in the West, but hasn't been studied for whitetail fawns in the South. So it's hard enough to even get hunters to hunt bears. So you drag one bear out of the mountains, and most bear hunting crews are over in Georgia from people I've talked to. However, so in my eyes, this predator control is somewhat of a scapegoat in this circumstance. So the real long-term results come with active forest management and improving this habitat to get some of this diversity back on the landscape. Because you know, these North Georgia forests, they're stagnant. They're really not healthy. Now, this was a photo that I took of the Chattahoochee National Forest that's kind of a general representation of some of the areas. So many of you have hardwood stands that look like this on your properties, I'm sure. The canopy is closed. You're not seeing any sunlight reach the ground. It's restricting growth of those forbs, those weedy plants that deer like to eat and also hide in. So you don't see any cover, no shrubs, no bushes, and some of the pure pine stands up there look even worse than this. So we would walk through and find a newborn fawn just laying in the middle of the leaves. So you can imagine a predator walking through and just snatching it up, easy like that, easy to find. So what looks like easy hiking to us, you know, easy to look through, something that may be attractive to us and many hikers in North Georgia, it's not ideal for deer or other wildlife. On top of that, this leaf litter builds every year, further blocking that mineral soil. So oak acorns need to land on this mineral soil to start germinating. So now you're even restricting oak regeneration. So we need to make this look more like this. You can see the vegetation popping up in the understory, providing more quality food, better cover. A fawn could hide a lot better than that. You can even see some of the techniques that were likely used in this picture to improve the habitat, which are techniques that landowners can use as well. So they likely did a timber thinning. You can see that they marked the trees that they wanted to keep. That looks like a white oak. and a type of red oak, possibly a black oak. And these were likely, possibly the trees that are known as to be their good acorn producers. So these were the ones that were left. You can see that the trees are more widely spaced and that sunlight is actually hitting the ground, which is bringing up these plants. After thinning, they may have even ran a prescribed fire through here to burn off the leaf litter and open up that seed bank to allow this stuff to grow back. Look at the middle tree. It also looks like they chainsaw girdled a tree in the middle. It's that one right there. And that was likely an undesirable tree species that was taking up sunlight and resources from other plants that they wanted to grow there. So these are just multiple things that can be done to improve this habitat. Now, the issue for our national forest is a lot of these habitat improvement efforts are deadlocked. So the Forest Service has long regulatory processes, as the feds tend to work, and so that they have to follow. So before a management plan can be put into action, they have to put everything out to public comment. They have to go through multiple environmental assessments. And they often get caught up in litigation battles with different forest advocacy groups. So many groups with a preservation mindset where wilderness should be untouched by humans, which is hopefully a well-intentioned, ideology. The problem with this thought process is the landscape has been influenced and managed by humans for thousands of years. So Native Americans would set fires regularly. They would clear areas around the villages. They would reset the brush in forests. And they did some of the first wildlife management by doing this. They had to have known that it benefited game populations around their areas. So natural fires were also allowed to burn across landscapes. And because it occurred more frequently, you didn't get these big Holocaust fires that we get today. So this hands-off approach has led to unhealthy forests. The Southern Appalachians, they now have declining populations of deer, ruffed grouse, several species of songbirds. And these maturing forests are creating a lot of deadwood. It's basically leaving a matchbox just ready to be lit laying out there that leads to these uncontrollable wildfires that we see more often now. So many of our national forests are now in critical condition, and controlling these situations with prescribed fire timber management can help alleviate some of this. So how can this pertain to you? So many of you likely do not have issues with declining deer populations. Maybe you actually want to reduce numbers. Maybe you want to improve herd health. Maybe you want to grow bigger bucks. The point is, management is going to differ at different locations and with different goals. So there are some basic management tools that all private landowners can use, however, and I'll just go through some of them generally. So number one is, if you really want to set up a deer management plan on your property, you need to collect data. That's how your decision making starts, and how you will change up prescriptions down the road. So this, especially if you have large properties, a couple hundred acres plus, you can really impact the deer population on that area. If your properties are smaller, you might want to think about working with your neighbors on this. So you can see how we used harvest data in this research, and it gave us an idea of the herd condition in North Georgia, and we were able to cancel that out as a reason of something to look at for decline. So always weigh your harvested deer if you can. Start playing with age estimation. There's some general techniques by using teeth aging. You can even take notes of how many fawns you're seeing with does in the fall to get this estimated recruitment rate, an idea of how many fawns you're having to join your population. So all of this is valuable for your management strategy And it also just keeps it fun. You're able to keep up with the wildlife on your property. Number two, so the easiest way to implement management, if you are a hunter, is the trigger finger. So selective targeting may be able to impact deer numbers. As you saw, this is a strategy implemented by wildlife agencies, all over the country. You can influence how many reproductive individuals are on the landscape by increasing or decreasing harvest rates. You can also influence these different sex ratios, your age structure of bucks. So selective harvesting. And there's many benefits to this depending on your goal, once again. And there's several techniques that are easy for anyone to do some of this habitat improvement. So, not everyone has the ability or large enough property to actually advise a timber harvest, but you can do some timber stand improvements or TSI yourselves. There's a hack and squirt method here where you can use literally a hatchet squirt bottle, and you hack your undesirable trees. They can even be invasive species, and inject herbicide. This can clear out some of the mid-story, clear out some of these undesirables, and make way for more desirable plants, more quality forage for your deer. The same can be done with larger trees with chainsaw girdling. You chainsaw around that outer layer, and you again can input herbicide. Now you can also use hinge cuts if, say, your property is lacking cover. So you can cut partially through the tree, not enough to kill the tree, but enough to push it over so there's still connection, and it will start to resprout. And that actually builds cover that a deer can hide in. Another one, there's mineral stumping. So cutting a stump very low and not using herbicide and allowing it to regrow like that. And this green growth is actually highly nutritious, and has been shown and even tested in the lab to have more quality nutrients, stuff that a deer needs, versus a plant that's been growing. So this fresh green growth is what you need. You can also use a backpack sprayer. So herbicide, if you have some invasive species, mostly is what this is going to be used for. And you can walk through the woods and spray spot some of that stuff. So the National Deer Association website has a lot of great information on these different techniques, and even suggestions on what herbicides to use, how to apply it. And this is really easy stuff for anyone, even if you're not experienced in it, to do. Stepping it up a notch would be implementing some prescribed fire. So many of you may already do some of this on your properties. It's a way of resetting vegetation, controlling competitive plants with your pine stands. And typically dormant season burns are conducted because they are less risky. The environment, the weather is more stable during this time. And this time of year, you can provide pretty good cover throughout the summer. So if you burn early, that vegetation is going to have time to grow, and it's going to provide cover for deer through the summer and fall. Recently, growing season fires are starting to gain some attention. This is a means of providing kind of new growth, some of that new green growth that I've talked about, to appear in the late summer. So in the South, this is when wildlife and deer are most stressed, because those plants that have been alive all summer, they're starting to dry out, they're starting to lose quality. So if you time a fire and then have that regrowth, you're providing good forage during a period that is stressful on a deer. This is also a period where deer are growing antlers, lactation is occurring in does. So you want to provide a lot of nutrition in this time if you want to have a healthy deer herd, grow larger antlers on your bucks. So all that comes to play. And the last one I'll mention is timber management. So like I said, thinning can allow more sunlight to reach the ground. allowing both the forest floor as well as the remaining trees that are standing flourish. Their canopies will expand. If they're oaks, they'll been shown to develop more acorns if you leave your good producers. It's important for oak regen, important for pine stand management. Another option is making small clear cuts if you're lacking some of that open early successional habitat we talked about. But again, these need to be maintained by fire, or these clear cuts will close up quickly. Been several years, and then it's out of control again. You've got to keep resetting that open area to keep that good deer vegetation growing. You just need to have diversity in mind. So do not do this one application to your whole property. It needs to be a mosaic. You're putting the puzzle pieces together. So maybe burn in the dormant season here, burn in the growing season here. Thin some timber here, do some herbicide application here. You want to create this diversity. Deer and other wildlife, they prefer multiple habitats and different stages of growth. They have various needs during different times of the year. So with these active measures, they would obviously need to fall within management plans agreed to by your land trust. So be sure to keep them involved in any of this if it interests you. And so I know I ran through a lot of stuff there and probably fairly quickly. Many of the things I mentioned could probably be their own talk. But I just wanted to generally describe how some of the research work that we do is connected to deer management, and how some of these different techniques can solve problems. And with that, I guess I'll go ahead and take some questions and hopefully be able to answer some. I don't know how long that talk took, but yeah, if there's anything for me.
Yes, hello. What do you know about chronic wasting disease in deer?
I know a decent amount. It's getting closer to Georgia, and as well as Alabama, obviously. What specifically is there anything specifically you need to know, or are you informed on it yourself, or?
Yeah, I really don't know much about it. I've got property in Floyd County, Rome, Georgia.
Okay. So it has not been detected in Georgia yet. So what it is a prion disease. So right. That is basically, it's not a virus, it's not bacteria, it's this misfolded protein that basically attacks their neurological system. Similar to mad cow disease. There's also a human version called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease.
Right.
And it degenerates the deer. It's 100% fatal. It may take a few years before clinical signs even show, but that deer eventually will die. Females does can transfer it to fawns in vitro, so while they're pregnant. And when you see a deer with this, a lot of times they'll have these disorders. They may be walking in circles. They may be skin and bones. It's a big concern because we don't know any cure yet, and we don't exactly. There's a couple of things they've tried to slow the spread. Obviously, that's the reason why you need to take deboned meat across state lines, and so there's a lot of regulations on that. And it's trying to think the other kind of the main management protocol now is as soon as it's detected, they'll try to reduce deer densities in those areas through culling to keep deer from spreading it. But there's a lot of research going on with that, and there's going to continue to be, because as we know, during the rut or anything, bucks can move for miles. So if a buck has chronic wasting disease and decides to switch locations, it can spread that way. And that's part of the reason that a lot of there's a big talk on baiting. So baiting, it brings all these deer together. They're urinating, they're defecating in these areas, and that holds CWD. And it can also go into the soil, which it can be in the soil for years. So it's a big management question for deer hunters in the future and managers. Some populations have seen declines with it, some have not. And as of yet, we have not seen a transfer to humans. So I think in a lab, they were successfully able to transfer it to a monkey through highly controlled situations, so a non-human primate. But the CWC still advises, if you're in a CWD area, to have your meat tested first. That's kind of a general rundown. Sorry, is there any other specifics?
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sorry, Adam, in the chat, we have a question. Two, what are your thoughts on corn feeders to make the deer bigger? Good or bad idea? And then also, what should you do if you suspect you have a deer on your property with chronic wasting disease?
If you suspect, so first, the easy answer on suspecting chronic wasting disease is harvest that deer and get it tested. Obviously don't go out of season, but if it's in season, you need to harvest that deer and get it tested. Hunters are going to be a big management tool for managers in the future, as far as reducing these densities. The threat is that if CWD in an area, we don't want hunters to stop hunting. That's the threat. So harvest that deer, get it tested, and that's how it is on that. As far as corn goes, so corn, I had a professor that always told me that corn does not grow strong deer, it grows fat deer. So corn, it doesn't have protein, it's a carbohydrate. So it's kind of the equivalent to us wanting to eat M&Ms all day. We're going to keep going back to it. We're highly attracted to it, but it's not necessarily what's getting us going. So corn is not what I would call a supplemental feed. Now it is very beneficial in hunting season for harvesting deer. If you're trying to control your numbers, I said use the trigger finger. If you have those kind of goals, it's very helpful for that. But as far as a growing deer with corn, that's not. I would prefer some of these habitat improvement measures over that.
Do we have any other questions?
I'd like to ask one.
Yeah.
Have y'all noticed a link between CWD and drought conditions where you have very few water holes, say in larger creeks? When they get down to water holes, they kind of get stagnant and the deer tend to use those holes more?
I'm not, I don't know if that's been looked at, or at least I'm not familiar with that research work yet. Now, I see where you're going with that. You're less water holes, you're concentrating deer, right? The same as a feeder would. So I could see that measure for sure. Water holes, whether they're drying up or there, has a lot more to do with hemorrhagic disease and the midge growth cycle and spreading that, which that's a natural disease. That follows a cyclic pattern. But so yeah, I'm not as familiar with that regarding CWD, but I see where you're going with that.
Okay,
and it makes sense.
Well, we've had some of ours tested and they were real high in E. coli, and just really unhealthy. There's nothing you can do about it except for hope, pray for rain, and let it wash through, out, clean out.
Anytime deer are congregated, that increases the risk of disease, parasites, E. coli, as you said. So yeah, that is one of those natural cycles, I suppose.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I've got something, Adam. Are you familiar with the Mississippi State Deer Lab study? I think Patrick Grunwald has spoken to me about it relating to nutrition and antler growth, you know, because
Yeah,
I feel
looking at
like
the three different regions of Mississippi. Yeah.
and if maybe you can speak to that some, but you know, a big thing that you hear, especially with people in our position, travel across state, different regions, you see tendencies in deer, you know, bucks, different antler sizes, antler shapes, and a lot of people go to the claim, you know, genetics, it's genetics. But I feel like that research kind of spoke more to nutrition and the availability, you know, the potential of a fawn to reach, you know, certain stages of maturity, and the size of its antlers and stuff can even pertain to before its feet ever hit the ground, correct?
Right. So yeah, you're bringing up a whole new seminar now. But yeah, the genetics versus environmental discussion. So what a lot of research has found now is, you know, can you control the genetics of your herd through harvesting maybe spike deer or these deer with these antler characteristics that you don't believe are this dominant buck? And the answer is no. And how we know this is what you're referring to is a Mississippi study. So there's three, I guess, kind of sub-regions that they checked in Mississippi, being coastal plain, the river delta, and I guess the Piedmont is kind of the middle region. And what you generally see and what people used to characterize as genetics is deer on the coastal plain. They're smaller, their antler size do not grow as well as deer in that Mississippi River Valley. Those deer are bigger bodied. They tend to grow larger antlers. And what people tend to think is that's genetics from where maybe they were restocked from during the time. But what Mississippi State did, which is pretty cool, is they took live deer from each of those three regions, brought them to their deer pens, fed them all the same nutrition, same environment, same living conditions, everything. And through a few generations, they found that their antler sizes converged almost. So the groups of deer from these different regions, their antler growth and body size converged with the same environmental aspects, conditions, the same food. So while genetics that's the potential a deer can have is in their genetics, but the environment is what allows them to express that potential. So a lot of these characteristics and size and people trying to affect the genetics on their property, especially if it's an open property, no fences, you really can't do it. Texas has done a lot of these studies as well. So what they're saying is habitat improvement measures can really improve your herd more so than the trigger finger or calling these different inferior bucks, right? So, and I could go in a lot of detail on that, but I don't know if anyone else has another question.
Yeah, I've got one question, kind of specific, but it might apply to other landowners. So we have an area sort of on a property we have that's just completely covered in privet, and we're in the process of removing it. I'm just wondering, like, in terms of that, to kind of keep it coming back, are there any good recommendations for species if we're going to go in and do kind of an active replanting to kind of crowd that out? If it's, going to be maintained, we're kind of hoping to be like kind of, cover land versus like an open field or something like that.
Yeah. Honestly, it's hard to plant something that's going to outcompete privet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, privet, it is the invasive species. It's very good at what it does. And a lot of people that have those hardwood stands that I was talking about with closed canopy, that they'll keep the privet because that's the only form of cover for deer. And deer will eat privet, and a lot of birds will eat the berries. But the problem is, unless you are able to eradicate the privet, which is very tough to do, it will keep spreading and coming back. So the best option is just kind of keeping it at bay, right? Because it's very hard to get rid of, because it produces a lot of seed. The birds eat those seed and they will poop it out everywhere else. So that's what keeps it going. So it is hard. I'm trying to think. You can foliar spray privet. I'm trying to think of the herbicide that I've used in the past.
What's the one that's soil active that you were talking about, like the hack and squirt method? Does it start with a T, maybe?
Well, that one for so triclopyr, that we're talking about. That one's used a lot in pine stand management for hardwood control. So it oftentimes triclopyr will kill your hardwoods, not your pines, but it'll allow all this brushy, shrubby stuff will still persist through it. And privet might be one of those. I'd have to look deeper into that. Now for timber stand improvement, actual hack and squirt, Arsenal is kind of the main herbicide being used now. But you have to use that in low doses because it can be soil active. And if you drop your spray can and it leaks anywhere, you can be killing your oaks too. So you got to be careful with it. So sorry, I don't have a better answer on the privet. It's I don't believe that other plantings are going to keep it at bay more so than just some different foliar sprays.
If you were going into a property that maybe doesn't have the best natural mass production for food sources, what would be your ideal type of vegetation to put in place that could provide food during those kind of more rough periods of the year? Let's say, think more Piedmont, coastal plain, Georgia, Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, again, your burn timing. So those summer burns that can provide more vegetation through that fall period. A lot of people kind of bang on the acorns are the pivotal deer food. This time of year they eat more than that. They will eat the buds off twigs. They'll eat greenbriers. They eat a lot of food during this time. So if you do this habitat improvement measures to have more biomass out there, it should be enough to still get them through that stressful period. Now, if I always go habitat improvement first, but there is the food plot, idea from that supplemental food plot. You can get them. You can use a winter grain, a wheat, a rye, mixed with a clover that grows through the summer, and that clover can actually last, into late or early winter, and that's an additional supplemental food. But if you follow these habitat improvement regimes as well, that natural food can carry them through. So while acorns in North Georgia are extremely important because a lot of that biomass isn't available, and they'll end up eating rhododendron, and they can starve to death eating rhododendron because there's no nutrients in it. Where in the Piedmont, and there's a lot more biomass that can be out there with proper techniques. Unless you want to go with the food plot, because that's an option as well.
Just fill it up with iron clay peas.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I've got just one more for you, Adam. Is there a recommended website or organization that offers a lot of good kind of management implication information for anyone that might want to go there?
Yeah. So I think I quickly mentioned it way back, but it was National Deer Association. So their website, they have a lot of articles on specific how to hack and squirt, how to implement your first prescribed burn and who to go through. You talk to the Nature Conservancy. You guys might have some connections for them on that. But I would say, as far as deer management, timber stand improvement, National Deer Association is a great website for that, and very easy stuff to read.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think we at the Land Trust and many other people in natural resource fields, we already just greatly recommend burning, controlled burns. Smokey the Bear was a great tool by the NPS out west, but I think out here on the East Coast, it in a lot of cases did more harm than good. A lot of people are hesitant to put fire on the ground. It's a scary thought to someone who's not familiar with it, but obviously these are fire adapted ecosystems and they need that. And even visiting one of our easement properties up in North Georgia yesterday, pulling in down a Forest Service road, and there's a Smokey the Bear sign. Only you can prevent forest fires while the leaf litter is probably 6 inches or better, or in all the surrounding area to that place. It probably hasn't been burned in over a decade or more. So yeah, I highly recommend that just as a natural resource management application outside of wildlife.
And I will say, I think Smokey the Bear changed in the last couple of years. I think it's only you can prevent wildfires now instead of forest fires. So Smokey's coming around.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
All right. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, Ben, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yep. Thank you all. And if anyone has any other questions, Ben and Katie know how to contact me. I did have my email on the first
do you have your
page.
email or anything?
What's that?
Yeah, I was going to see if you had any contact in case anybody wanted to reach out.
Yeah, let me go all the way back to my email. I'm not
Unfortunately, he does not have Instagram though.
Yeah,
we try to give you a little bit of clout, but
maybe I need to start. All right, so that's my email. So contact me through that, and we can work forward. Yeah, I'm not a big social media guy. Maybe I should be.
All right. Thank y'all. I hope y'all have a great day.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.